Welcome to this first interactive session in 2022 from the PLM Global Green Alliance. My name is Jos Voskel and I'm here together with my Green Alliance partner Klaus Brettschneider. Related to the PLM Global Green Alliance, you can find everything on our website. And what is our purpose? The plmgreenalliance.com. For this year, we are planning to discuss PLM and sustainability together with the major PLM vendors. What are they doing and how can they help us? And we are happy and honored today that we can talk with Darren West from SAP. SAP is one of the world's leading software providers for management of business processes. And Darren is the product manager of SAP Circular Economy Solutions. So welcome Darren, and please introduce yourself to us as an audience.
Hi, so hello everyone. Hello, my name's Darren West. Thank you, Jos. Thank you, Klaus, for inviting me to be with you today. And yes, hopefully we'll have a nice conversation about the circular economy and what SAP is doing to help with that.
Okay. And how did you get into this topic of circular economy, Darren?
That's a good question, because circular economy is quite new, I think. It's not that new. People have been looking at it for decades, but I think it's not something that everybody out there will have heard of. Everybody knows about climate change, but circular economy is sort of just becoming fashionable, I would say, and becoming mainstream. But how did I get into it? So I spent many years in professional services. I worked in the telco industry before I got into software. And then when I joined SAP, I was working on implementation and design services and that kind of thing. And I was very passionate about sustainability. And so I just started working on some of these issues around sustainability and how we can help our clients to be more sustainable. And then that got me into the circular economy. And so I've been working with the circular economy team, basically innovating and building new products for the last couple of years.
Okay, great. Yeah, as you can see, I have the circular economy diagram behind me.
Yes.
And also more on our website. Now, talking about SAP, I mean, what does sustainability mean for SAP, and how do you implement this yourself or help your customers?
Yeah. So at SAP, we tried to be a company that believes in sustainability. So the very first thing we did was to make sure that we were sustainable. So we call this our setting a good example or exemplar strategy. So we, for example, use green energy in our data centers. We have no single-use plastics. We've announced we're going to be carbon neutral by 2023, these kind of things. So that's like being a good role model. But actually what we decided was SAP can have a bigger impact on its customers, because we've got quite a lot of big customers. We can have a bigger impact, on the environment by helping our customers to be more sustainable. So we've developed software in 3 different areas: climate change, circular economy, and the social side, to try and help our customers become more sustainable.
Yeah, I was imagining that as SAP, you are part of the execution of companies, so you should be also be able to measure what they are doing. Eh?
Yes, exactly.
And can you give some more insights on that?
Sure. Okay. So, let's look into the 3 pillars of the strategy then. So, and you can find a little bit more on this. I've got some slides over here that I'll show you in a minute. But the 3 pillars are climate action, so measuring and tracking the emissions of companies, and that covers both Scope 1 and Scope 2, the things that they do, and Scope 3, which is often involving suppliers, and also the downstream impact. And then with the circular economy, we've got a whole load of new products, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And then the 3rd pillar is looking at essentially zero inequality, we call it, which is around human rights and making sure that we are, being fair to employees and suppliers, and the human right and protecting human rights of people involved.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Those 3 pillars, and especially the 3rd pillar, I think is the one that is challenging, but I think very motivating for people if it's happened.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So,
in what areas, if you talk about circular economy, I mean, SAP talks very often from the end-to-end process, what is actually not circular, right? So I think
yes.
SAP has to change the approach there as well. We sit in the product launch of the new product in this area. So what is the plan for SAP basically to feed these information? Or first, what kind of information do you collect and present, and then how you feed it back into the business process?
Sure. Good. Well, I'm glad you mentioned our new product. I'll tell you a little bit about that first of all, but let me take a step back and talk about our circular economy strategy. So what we recognize, and you picked up on this, Klaus, so the traditional way of thinking is that it's what we call the linear economy. You take stuff, you make things, and then you throw them away. And only about 8.7% of the world's resources are recycled right now, which means that 91% of the world's resources are either thrown away into landfill, burnt, or, so that's more CO2, or they're thrown into the ocean. And that's clearly not sustainable. So if you start to think about circular economy, what you have to do is think about how can I reuse products? How can I take them back and refit them? So for capital goods like machines, how can I make them more durable and I can just replace parts? And for consumer goods like Coca-Cola and these kind of things, it's how do I recycle the packaging? So we've spent a lot of time with our customers to understand what is it they need to help them become more circular. And we started with plastic. We will look at other materials like textiles and building materials and battery components later, but we started with plastic. And our new product is called Responsible Design and Production. What it does is it does two things. So the first thing it does is it mashes all the data that you would have in PLM systems, for example, production systems. And it takes that data and it compares it with external data around all the different EPR schemes. Now I'll explain what that means because that might be a bit jargon for some of your listeners. So EPR is Extended Producer Responsibility. It's the idea that the producer pays for the costs of recycling the material. And it's very common in the EU, but for listeners outside the EU, it's not so common. So in the EU, you have to pay a fee depending on how much plastic you produce. And on top of that, there are new laws coming out with plastic taxes.
Okay. Maybe a question on this fee there. You pay the fee to who?
So you pay the fee, and it's different, but every single country has a different set of rules.
Okay.
But you pay the fee to what's called a PRO, which is a producer responsible organization. But it's essentially, it could be a group of companies, or it could be one company, and it could be owned by the state, or it could be private. But essentially, this is a body that is set up to promote recycling. Mm-hmm. So in the case of packaging, which is where we started, in Europe now there are different bodies in Germany and France and Belgium, etc., that are responsible for taking all the consumer waste and all the industrial waste and recycling that plastic. And the EU has set targets for this, but each country has to do it, put their own laws into place and their own PRO bodies. Mm-hmm. And the result of that is it's really, really complex because everybody's got different definitions, everybody's got different schemes, different payments. And for our customers, that's a real nightmare. So what we do is we take all that different complicated law and regulations and we map that onto their production data, and that enables them to, with one or two clicks, figure out what it is they need to pay and complete all the paperwork and that kind of thing. So that's the first thing that the new product, Responsible Design Production, does. The second thing it does is helps designers to say, okay, well, what if I want to be more sustainable? Maybe what if I swap this plastic for this other plastic that's 100% recycled? What's the impact? How recyclable is my product in Belgium or France or Italy or Spain? And then, what are the fees I need to pay, and how much more do I need to pay up front, but how much less do I need to pay in plastic taxes? Mm-hmm. These kind of calculations. Right. And this legislation is pushing companies to become more and more sustainable because it's charging them more for products that can't be recycled or have very low recycled content. But if you use a more recyclable product, then you pay less fees. So it's pushing everybody in the right direction.
It's more.
It's difficult to manage.
Yeah. It's more a kind of I would say optimization step. That you have your process, and then let's see how we can make it less damaging or more sustainable. Right.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So that's our very first product that we've just launched. We launched it back in December at COP26. and it's called Responsible Design and Production. It's all about eliminating waste, making things more sustainable.
Okay.
And then we've got a few more ideas, which I can tell you about if you like, about what we do next.
But maybe to stay on the data point, because this is also what we like in the PLM world. We are also in a transformation from document-driven approach to a data-driven approach, and you are talking also about data collection, which I assume is not in documents. It's you're looking probably for databases, data sources.
Yes, and it does vary. So if it could be that the customer's got all their data in one nice PLM system, which would be great if it was all in the right place. But often what we find is they've got their production records, their recipes, if you like, for making different products. And then they would have in another system, they would have maybe information about packaging. This could be in a different database, or it could even be in external records that they have to pull in. So that could be, say, in the procurement database, or it could be sitting in the finance records. So what you find is companies usually have this information, but it's spread around in different places. And that was one of the challenges that we solved with this new product, was to pull in all the data from all the different sources, put it in one place so that you can then do the calculations that you need to do.
And of course, there are also external data sources needed, because not every company is collecting the right data. Can you name any of the ones you're working with? What are the major ones?
Oh, well, the biggest customer we're working with right now is Nestle. They helped us to develop the solution. That's one of the biggest consumer goods companies out there. We're working with a number of different companies throughout the consumer goods industry, because we started with plastic, we started with packaging. And what we want to do next is extend that thinking to other materials.
Okay.
So you will find this whole kind of extended producer responsibility EPR legislation applies now to a number of different materials. You'll see it for batteries, you see it for waste electronics. In France, they have one for textiles, which is going to spread to the whole of the EU as well soon.
Okay. So with these new regulations, you always have to, I think the challenge for customers or for companies is that every regulation creates the need to collect data on different topics.
That's right.
So, and it gets right complex. You basically have to figure out what information you have to collect, and then you have to apply to the law and compare your information. How will one SAP get this under control with?
That's precisely the challenge we're trying to fix here. So and it gets even more interesting, Klaus, because the legislation keeps changing. So I'll give you an example of that. So at the moment, we basically have people that study the different legislation, and then they code that into our software. And then, of course, in other, like you say, with databases, we can pull the data from different databases, like manufacturing databases, PLM databases, that kind of thing. And we can pull that into a central point, and then we mash these two data sources together so that we can calculate, okay, what is the impact? What are the fees you need to pay? What are the forms you need to fill in, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a new thing coming along, which is available in France right now, but will probably roll out everywhere. It's a thing called Ecomodulation. And Ecomodulation is the idea that governments want people to be more sustainable, right? They want more recycling. They want you to be using more recycled material in your products, because that's good for the planet, right? So that's generally a good thing. Yeah. So they're writing legislation that's trying to nudge companies to do the right thing. So they're giving them incentives. So Ecomodulation says, okay, if I take this product here, maybe this little mouse here, and I make it from 100% recycled plastic, then I pay a very small fee for the recycling. But if I make it from, say, 50% recycled plastic, then I pay a higher fee because I've got virgin material in there. And if it's like 100% virgin, then I pay an even bigger fee. And that's called Ecomodulation. Okay. And of course, the rules for that are very different, because the fees are different for different materials, and the rules are different from different country to different country. And you pay the fee based on not on where you make the stuff, but where you sell your product. So you need to look at the sales data, because you might manufacture in one place and sell in another place. You need to look at imports and exports as well. So it does get very complicated very quickly, Klaus. But data is the answer. So if you have the data, you can comply with all these laws and regulations. and that means you can start to track you're becoming more sustainable, which is good.
Yeah, in a way, I was thinking, Darren, that actually consumer packaged goods is a simple industry. It's a recipe, and then you have a mass production, and the chance that your product is coming back is small. It's more consumed, and it's the packaging that is. How do you see those principles growing in more complex products like?
Well, I can give you a good example actually, and I will put another slide in about this one. There's a consortium called the Catena X consortium, which some of you may have heard of. That's based in Germany, and it's in the automotive sector. So SAP is involved in that one as well as a data partner. And their concept is very cool. So this is applying the idea of a circular economy to cars, right? So what they want to do is they want to build a digital twin model of a car. And so what you want to know is, okay, where do the raw materials come from? So the plastic used for the seats and the dashboard, for example, the metals used in the batteries, and all the electronics and all this kind of stuff. You want to know exactly where it comes from. Ideally, you want to be using recycled material. And then you make your car, you sell it, and you build a digital twin of that vehicle. So when it goes out and the customer's driving it and using it, you can measure, every time it gets serviced, you can download from the computer all about the battery performance, how many times it's been recharged, etc. When you swap a part, you can record that in a database. So the digital twin model of the car gets up to date. And then eventually when this car is ready for scrapping, you want to recycle as much as you can. So you take all the component parts and you reuse them and recycle them. If you have a digital twin model of the car, you know exactly what to do with every single component on the car. And then you can pull those back, put them back into manufacture and start to reuse them again. So it's a really clever concept. So they will do that, and we've just started to get involved in that. That could be live over the next couple of years. So you will have basically these very sophisticated computer twins of these big physical devices like cars, but it enables us to then recycle more and more of the component parts.
Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic visionary story. I mean, and then you start to imagine, okay, how do I get there? And the first thing is, of course, reliable data. I mean, and I think this is often what companies don't realize, that they need to care about data.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have data, you can. I mean, there's the old adage that you can't measure, you can't manage what you can't measure. Yeah. So you have to measure things first. Same applies to CO2. Yeah. Same applies to the circular economy. Until you start measuring things, you can't manage any kind of change.
Because you see those concepts of data lakes. People are collecting all kind of data, but they don't know where to search for.
They don't know what they want to use it for.
Because it's the context of the data that in the end defines the value.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you get into some interesting challenges as well, Jos. So, for example, I'm sure some of your listeners will be thinking this now. It's like, well, I don't want to share all of my data with everybody in a supply ecosystem. Yeah. So one of the challenges is some data needs to be shared in order for this whole kind of circular loops to work, right? Yeah. You need to know, where the materials came from, and you need to know some properties about the materials, You may even want to track the carbon emissions that go with the materials as well. That would be sensible if you were building like a digital twin. But some information might be like, where you sourced the component, or some of your manufacturing techniques might be commercially sensitive, right? So you may want to protect that. So the idea is that you could build a data model where you can share important information that you need for the circular economy, but at the same time you can protect information that you don't want to share with your competitors. So that makes the data challenge quite interesting, but it also means that once people understand that we can protect the confidential information, then they're willing to share the other stuff, which means that the circular economy can start to happen. And one of the things that's different maybe from the linear ways that you mentioned before, Klaus, is the circular economy is all about, nobody can do it on their own. It's all about it's a team sport. Everybody has to help each other out.
Yeah, and that's indeed, that was the next step. We talked about data, and then we get data sharing. And as soon as you start to share data, you need to have a kind of taxonomy. You need to have a kind of classification. What is the type of data you're sharing? Do you see anything happening on that level with exchange standards, exchange platforms?
Yes, there are some very interesting things happening there with the concept of product passports.
Right.
So it sort of builds on this idea. You remember I spoke a few minutes ago about having a digital twin of a car. Well, the product passport sort of takes that a step lower, if you like. So you have essentially a passport, a digital passport for a batch of materials. So maybe it's, let's say it's the batteries in the car, right? So the battery components within the battery cells may have, if you like, a digital record. They call it a passport because people can visualize that.
Yeah.
And as that material, gets recycled and then maybe gets put into a new battery, its properties follow it, so that the record of that material and the way that it's been remanufactured is kept in the passport, like a stamp in your passport.
Right.
So that every time that you recycle this, this piece of copper or nickel or whatever, kind of where it's been and how many times you can recycle it. So that's good, right? Because that means everything is ultimately traceable, and it also keeps that material in use, which is one of the principles of. You've got on your diagram behind you there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the concepts are very interesting, but it also depends then on the people, huh?
Yes.
Who do you see are the ones that are driving this kind of?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen there's a number of product passport initiatives starting up. The EU's very much looking at this. There is an initiative starting with with Luxembourg, where they're trying to develop an ISO framework for product passports. There's also a lot of research going on I'm aware of, with a lot of the German institutes are looking at creating product passports. So there isn't a standard just yet, but I think it will emerge. The idea is to produce an ISO standard within the next 2 years. So that'll have a sort of data taxonomy, if you like, of what sort of information should be coded and how it should be coded.
Right. Yeah, I think the beauty is here we are in a new area, a green field, as you might call it. So we could converge relatively fast because there are no dominant players at the moment. Like if
That's
you see
right.
in the old industry, the CAD industry was suffering from the fact of the formats. Huh?
Yeah.
And
now, I think one of the things, come back to your thing about kind of people working in ecosystems or groups. What you will see is industries probably working together, and that means that people are normally competing are actually working together to solve some of these sustainability problems. Like the circular economy is a really good example of this. So companies may compete at the product level, but when it comes to helping drive circular economy, helping to recycle materials and that kind of thing, they work together as an industry, which I think is a good thing. So you're seeing that, for example, with battery recycling. You're seeing it with plastics. And it has a number of benefits, because if you think about it, there's some research that was done recently by a group called Material Economics in Sweden. And they said that actually if you can recycle and reuse materials, particularly very carbon intensive materials, you can save around 50% of the CO2 embedded within those materials. So what that would mean for the EU, if we were to do it in the EU, for example, that by 2050 we could save half of our carbon emissions by putting in place this circular economy.
Right.
So there's lots of added benefits from that, and also there's increased jobs.
Right.
Because it means that we would need to be repairing and reusing and recycling things much closer to home. And so those materials would be, within our country or nearby, and we would be recycling, and we would have more guys repairing things, maybe going back in time a little bit, but that would mean more jobs in our local economy. Yeah. So that's a good thing, I think.
But that would require...
At the end where I think the social environment plays a big role. So I
Yes.
think you can have all the techniques in place, and I think all is great. But if you don't have the society behind to really make these changes happen, it's still, and you will still find them companies trying to use the system for their advantage instead of stepping in and stepping up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think this is where you've got this kind of mix of pressure. So you've got pressure from consumers and customers who want to be doing the right thing. They want to have a more sustainable product, and you start, especially younger people are now really demanding that from companies. They want to see where are things made and how are things being reused and recycled. You've got governments legislating, so they're saying you must use more recycled materials. Because they realize that we're going to run out of materials if we don't, right? So they're passing laws to say you must increase the amount of recycled content, which is good. And then you also see investors who are now saying, look, if you don't have a sustainable business, you won't have a business in 10 years' time. It'd just be out of business. Right. So there's a lot of pressure now on companies to make these changes.
Yeah. Do you think there will be a tipping point where companies just the benefit for the company is great enough to do cycle economy?
I think so. I think it's starting to happen, yeah. And it is a blend. It is a blend of customer pressure, investors' pressure, and government action as well. Because as you say, I'll give you an example. Virgin plastic right now, it depends on the price of oil. But usually virgin plastic is cheaper than recycled plastic, because you have to take the plastic back and you have to, put some energy in, and you have to pay people to collect it and process it. So of course it's a little bit more expensive. But when you think about, the costs of cleaning up all the plastic pollution, then actually it makes sense to recycle plastic, right? So it's about adjusting the market mechanism to accommodate the true costs. Yeah. So when you think like that, when you think in systems, actually it makes a lot of sense. And it's really just about companies waking up and realizing that actually, in the long run, they'll be more sustainable, they can be more profitable if they take a circular economy. Right. And so a lot of research has been done by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and different industries about this. And if you make a more durable product, for example, then of course it's going to cost a little bit more at first. Exactly. But if you can reuse it and reuse it and reuse it and sell it a number of times, then actually you make more profit. So it's good for companies, but they just have to change their mindset.
Right, and that was the question Klaus started to ask, and I would like to continue on that. It's about when or how are you going to implement it? And yesterday I followed a conference. It was modularity and sustainability, because also more modular products can help. Yeah. And one of the points was that in the beginning, more sustainable products have a premium price. They are a little bit more expensive. If the consumer is ready to pay for it, yes, then it's the company will do it. But if the consumer doesn't do it, are they going to change their business model? And I think that's the tipping point where we are looking at.
I think it depends. If the consumer's not willing to pay, then yeah. But a lot of consumers now are. There's a lot of research out there. You find the Harvard Business Review published an article about 2 years ago that was from the New York University Stern Business School, and it said that sustainable brands, ones that can prove they are sustainable, not greenwashing, they're experiencing the highest growth, and the brands that aren't sustainable, they're declining. So we've reached that point now where consumers really do care. I always have a little story about this. I try and explain it to people why we need this combination of kind of consumer pressure and a little bit of government action as well. It's like I could run a business in my house that's profitable if I take all the waste products and I throw them over the fence into my neighbor's garden, right? And I don't have to pay for that cleaning up. But if I have to go next door to my neighbor's garden and I have to pay to clean up my mess, then maybe my business isn't profitable. So it's like that. If you have to take account of the full cost of what you're doing, then is it sustainable? And I think companies are realizing that now, because they're getting pressure from governments and from their investors and from their customers to be sustainable. So they've got to think about the full cost.
So do you think the current rise of energy prices is a good point for sustainability?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you've got solar panels on your roof right now, you'll be very happy, right? You won't have to pay for oil and gas.
But the sun is not shining.
Well, the sun is not shining, exactly. So we have to make the transition away from fossil fuel. That's got to happen. Yeah. But yes, it's going to be painful for a little bit, but it just has to happen.
Okay. So I think looking forward, we are looking. What should we expect more at the moment from SAP coming out in the near future?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I mentioned our responsible design and production product. We also are then thinking the next pillar in our circular economy strategy. I'll put a slide up about this in a sec. Is to look at circulating materials. So the first thing is eliminate waste. That's our first priority. Right. Second priority is let's get these loops moving around. Like I gave you the example about Catena X. So we're involved in the automotive industry. We're trying to create software that enables companies to be able to trace products all the way around these loops. So that's the next thing, circulation of materials. And then the third thing, which sort of links back to your comment about energy, is what we call a regenerative business. So what we think is, it's great if you can have zero emissions. It's great if you can have zero waste. But wouldn't it be better if you could leave the world in a more positive place than when you started? And that's what we call a regenerative business. And a lot of the big NGOs in this area, like Ellen MacArthur Foundation, for example, and the World Wildlife Fund, they're looking at actually business needs to do more to regenerate the environment. So we're looking at what can we do to help companies prove that they're regenerating the environment. So that's our third phase. Okay. And you'll see all of this over the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like you are in the middle of the green movement, going to sustainability, and it must be fun to work like this. What would you recommend to readers and viewers of this post to develop themselves also?
If you want to find out a little bit more about what SAP is doing, there's a very quick way. It's sap.com/CE, short for circular economy. So that's how you can get to what we're doing. I would look at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There's a number of places I would also look at. So, for example, Systemic is a very interesting group to watch. The World Economic Forum has a lot of information about circular economy. If you're interested in plastics, there's a thing called the GPAP, so you can look that up. That's all about controlling plastics. There is a very interesting business body called the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. They have projects on climate change and also on the circular economy. That's well worth a look. And one of the consultancies I mentioned before, Material Economics, is well worth a look. So I'll put some links up in some slides.
Great.
You can have a look at in a minute. Yeah. And I think you can download the slides. Is that right, Jos, at the end of the talk?
Yeah, we will write the links to the articles that you were referring to. I think it's a big pleasure to hear such statements coming from SAP and in the area of product lifecycle management. Klaus, some concluding remarks from your side?
No, I'm happy to have Darren here. I'm glad you could put this together, Jos. So I think it was a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so Darren, thank you for your time. I look forward to more in-depth interviews as hopefully the world is maturing and getting also more in-depth. We are at the early start, and hope to see you back. And thanks for your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you.